Hey, what's going on? You ever been in a fight before? Now, I don't mean like a fist fight, but any argument or conflict will do. For me personally, I had a lot of conflicts growing up with my little brother. It's kind of what brothers do. And many of these arguments were focused on pretty trivial things like a game of Mario Kart or Madden. And it often resulted with me winning, of course, because, I'm big brother, I'm better. And my brother freaking out and running up and turning off the GameCube and not allowing us to finish the game and claiming that it didn't actually count. Whatever it is, we all have conflicts in our lives. And today we're going to talk about one of the first major conflicts in world history where we have two different worldviews clashing together. Let's go. Last video we discussed the rise of the Greek polis, the numerous Greek city-states that became one of the most successful civilizations of the ancient world. And there's a few things we need to remember about the Greeks. First of all, because of the mountains and islands of Greece, these city-states were very separate from each other. But we also need to remember that there is a common Greek identity, and with that is sort of a sense of arrogance. You see, the Greeks believed that they were truly superior to anyone who was a non-Greek. In fact, the Greeks had a word, barbaroi, that described anyone who wasn't Greek. It's the same word that we use as barbarian, meaning somebody who's inferior or backward in comparison to our culture. But as successful as the Greeks were at this time, there was another civilization, an empire actually, that we've already discussed that was far more powerful and successful. By about 400 BC, the Persian Empire had reached its height. King Darius I was very successful in expanding Persia and creating the greatest empire in the world. And you also have to remember that Persia had this belief in King of Kings. Remember, for Darius, this meant he had absolute power, not only over his people, but over the world. Persian kings were believed to be like gods, kings of all other kings. So because of that, as the Persian Empire began to expand, it was clear that any other state in its path, it should be ruled by the Persians. By 492 BC, the Persian Empire stretched from India all the way into modern-day Turkey. Naturally, Darius turned his attention to the next phase of his conquest, Greece, and therefore the Mediterranean world. He quickly sent out messengers demanding tribute from the Greeks in the form of water and earth, a reference to all of the wealth that Greece had, which should be given to the king of all kings. While many city-states, out of fear of the conquest of Darius, submitted to Darius's demands, the Ionian Greeks rebelled. And the powerful city-state of Athens, who became very wealthy at this time, sent ships to aid them. While the Persians easily crushed all of these rebelling city-states, Darius was so upset that the Athenians dared defy him in that way. In fact, to fuel his rage, Darius had a messenger every night at his dinner table tell him and whisper in his ear, "Master, remember the Athenians." So it was clear that Darius was coming back. And in 492 BC, Darius created a massive invasion force that sailed across the Aegean Sea to invade mainland Greece. The Persian invasion force greatly outnumbered that of the Athenians and some of the other city-states that rushed to defend the beach. Using the geography of the narrow beachhead around them, as well as their strategy of the phalanx, the Greek army, led by the Athenians, was able to push back the Persians and drive them back into the Aegean Sea. Even though it was a massive upset, Greece was saved. And instantly, the Athenian army sent a messenger to run all the way back to Athens to tell them of the news. His name was Phidippides, and he would go down in history. Legend has it that Phidippides ran from Marathon all the way to Athens, and when he arrived, he uttered the word Nike, which means victory, and then collapsed and died. The distance between Marathon and Athens? 26.2 miles. Now you know where we get a marathon from. Despite the victory, the Athenian general Themistocles warned that the Persians might return and encouraged Athens to build up a massive navy to better defend themselves from future Persian attacks. Although Darius died in 480 BC, his son Xerxes sought to avenge his father's death and failure in Greece and returned with an even larger force. Xerxes went even bigger than Darius did, sending two invading forces, one by land that marched north through Turkey into Greece, and one by sea that took the same route that Darius's army had. Xerxes takes this King of Kings idea maybe a little too literally. I know I've shared this story already, but it's just too good and too funny. As Xerxes' land army moved closer to Greece, it had to cross a narrow body of water between Turkey and Greece called the Hellespont. And in order to do so, Xerxes' army attempted to build a large bridge. In the process, however, the water did not cooperate. And because of this, Xerxes, believing he was the king of kings and in control of all, had the sea whipped. Once again, further evidence showing what Xerxes believed about himself as king of kings. Everything should bow down to him. And he thought that this conquest should go easily for him, that he should be successful, and the Greeks, all of them, should bow to him. But as we mentioned, the Greeks were ready. Themistocles warned that the Persians would return with an even larger army. So the Greeks made an alliance amongst different city-states to help defend against this Persian invasion. Now, as we've mentioned, Greece is very mountainous. So for a land force to travel all the way to Athens, which was the goal, it was very treacherous going through these narrow mountain passes. In an attempt to slow down the Persians, a Spartan army led by the king Leonidas traveled to a very narrow mountain pass that the Persians would have to go through called Thermopylae. And herein lies one of the most famous battles of the ancient world. While there were likely more Greeks present, legend has it that only 300 Spartans traveled with Leonidas, and together they held off the Persians for an extended period of time before Xerxes and his army eventually prevailed and traveled further towards Athens. In his book, The Histories, Herodotus praises the heroic efforts of the Spartans and their heroic sacrifice that bought Athens time. Even though Persia crushed the Spartans at the Battle of Thermopylae, it bought Athens precious time in which they were able to evacuate the city. And when Xerxes' army finally arrived in Athens, the entire city was completely evacuated. The Spartan sacrifice allowed the Athenians to fight another day. And now it was time to see if Themistocles' prediction of building a massive navy would be valuable for Athens. Turns out it's the reason why Greece wins. At the Battle of Salamis, these Athenian warships constructed by Themistocles were able to easily outmaneuver Persian boats, which were much larger in the narrow Persian straits, and they used battering rams and rowers to take out these naval ships. Meanwhile, from the shore, Xerxes watched his fleet crash and burn, as well as his dreams of a massive Persian empire and his glorification as the king of kings. A year later, united Greek forces led by the Athenians once again would defeat the Persians at the battles of Plataea and Mycale, pushing Persia back into Asia Minor and Turkey and out of the Greek world forever. The Persian War is certainly a clash of worldviews. You have the Greeks, famous for their unity and reason and overall education, who believed that they were truly the best possible civilization, against the Persians, who believed in this idea, again, of king of kings, that their king was God and in control of all things. And so in this battle, you see that one worldview comes out over the other. And many have made the argument that because the Persian Wars went the way that it did, that's why so much of our world today is influenced by both the Greek and the Roman world. And that if Persia had won that war, we could be looking at a very different history and a very different world today. But you can do that with anything in history. In the meantime, the lesson that we should truly take from the Persian Wars is this. The Persian War shows what happens when Greece is unified. When they put aside their differences as city-states and they come together for that idea of alos that we discussed in our last video, Greece was strong. Clearly, it was the most powerful civilization in the known world. It just took out the world's largest empire to this point. So Greek pride and Greek unity had never been better. It was a great time to be Greek. But unfortunately for Greece, this won't last. The big winner from the Persian Wars was certainly Athens. They had preserved their state as a wealthy leader within all of the Greek city-states. And yet Sparta, who had always been the most powerful militaristically, had given up so much at the Battle of Thermopylae that it has now been completely overtaken in regards to wealth and status by Athens. Athenian success would only continue. In order to protect from a potential future invasion from Persia or any other country, Athens created the Delian League. This was an alliance that was meant to unify Greek city-states, much like they did during the Persian Wars, and come together to create a military force. But it actually only made Athens even more powerful, as they were the leader and basically formed a mini empire within Greece. Naturally, Sparta was pissed. From 460 BC to 429 BC, Athens experienced a golden age under the leadership of Pericles. He instituted an even larger form of democracy than the Council of 500, called direct democracy, where pretty much any true citizen could participate directly in government. In an attempt to encourage government participation, Pericles introduced stipends or salaries for public officials. And in order to protect his new democracy, Pericles introduced ostracism, or banishing people who were supposed threats to democracy. So while Athens is experiencing this golden age, Sparta is suffering. And when Athens formed the Delian League, Sparta was not invited. So Sparta said, oh yeah? Well, we'll make our own league. They created the Peloponnesian League, which included other city-states who didn't really like the new role that Athens had taken in leadership within Greece, as well as the credit Athens was taking for its success in the Persian Wars. Tensions between these two leagues only grew, and eventually civil war broke out between Athens and Sparta, what was known as the Peloponnesian War. This 27-year-long war would be a civil war in Greece, with Greeks fighting Greeks. What a contrast to what we just saw earlier with the Persian Wars, where Greeks were fighting together. Even though Athens was wealthier than Sparta and had all this success recently, it was still at a disadvantage. Athens just was not the military power that Sparta was. Sparta was located more inland, so it was actually protected by land, whereas Athens was exposed by sea. And Sparta will have an ally in all of this. A very unlikely one. Sparta teams up with Persia, who they just fought a few years earlier. And with the help of the Persian navy, Sparta is able to blockade Athens. Soon after that, Sparta, under the leadership of their king Lysander, will invade the city of Athens. Athens was surrounded by Spartan and other Greek armies. And in the midst of all that, a plague breaks out within Athens. Pericles himself even gets it. During the Peloponnesian War, almost a third of Athenian civilization died. And yet, while Lysander and the Spartans had the opportunity to burn Athens to the ground and erase it from history, they elected to show grace and mercy and allowed the city to survive. Sparta had regained its role as the leading Greek city-state, and Athens would return to its former glory and economic success. Yet the Peloponnesian War had divided Greece in a way that really could not be healed. Again, it's so interesting how within the same century you have all of these city-states putting aside their differences and coming together for their survival and showing how strong Greece could be, and yet how fragile that alliance was. And then in the end, they let their differences and their hatred for each other get the best of them, resulting in almost their mutual destruction. What a wonderful reminder it is for us as people, in our relationships, in our work environments, on our teams. We're stronger when we work together. And in fact, from our Christian worldview, that's exactly what we're called to do. 1 Corinthians 12:12 says, "For just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ." See, just like a human body, or just like the different Greek city-states, God has created us all uniquely and differently and with our own different gifts. But if we use that as a source of conflict, we will never be truly united together as one body as God calls us to be. So just like the Greeks, when they were together, they functioned great. They defended themselves and they were successful. But when they let all those differences get in the way, they fell apart. But it's important to recognize that we shouldn't just be united with the people around us. There's one other person we should be united with. And Ecclesiastes 4:12 says, "And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, two will withstand him. A threefold cord is not quickly broken." I know, it's a popular verse with weddings, but it makes sense here. We can't just be united with each other. It's the fact that we're united between us and with God that makes us truly strong. God has the ability to bring us together, and we are more effective in whatever it is that we're doing when we do it for His glory. And we recognize the fact that He is working between all of us. He gave us the gifts and the ability to do whatever it is we're trying to do. And we can't shun that. We can't forget that. And that's definitely something that the Greeks forgot. We saw the success of the Greeks coming together in the Persian War, and we saw what happens when they weren't unified in the Peloponnesian War. And even though after the Peloponnesian War there seemed to be a sense of normalcy back within the city-states of Greece, they were more divided and more exposed than they would ever be before. And the next invader that comes in, they won't be able to stop. But that is a story for another day. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.